From WisPolitics in Madison, you're listening to Capital Chats.
Hello, everybody. This is Kate Morton with WisPolitics here with a Capital Chats podcast brought to you by Spectrum. Today I'm here in the office with my colleague Abigail Levins to talk about her interview with Representative Christian Phelps, a freshman who is a Democrat from Eau Claire. So, Abigail, what did you guys talk about in the interview?
Thanks, Kate. Representative Phelps and I talked about his background in public education advocacy and how that's a priority for him in the legislature this session.
All right, let's hear what you guys talked about then.
So thank you for agreeing to join us on the podcast, Christian. I want to start by asking a little bit about your background and why you got into the legislature. So do you want to tell everyone about that?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. I was born and raised in Eau Claire, and I think there are a few formative experiences that I had that really kind of showed me that in order to achieve the Wisconsin community that I believe we want and need and deserve, we have to make serious changes, specifically in the State House. So, for example, in 2006, the year that I would turn 13, as I was sort of privately coming to understand my own identity as an LGBTQ person, that year a political movement spread across the state and resulted in a constitutional amendment banning same-sex marriage, which is why I know so personally and intimately that the political movements and rhetoric that come out of Madison and out of the Capitol are heard by young people. And that they can either make them feel safer and more welcome or less safe and less welcome because of the types of messages that we're sending. So that's a formative experience that informs me. I also was a public school student and a public school family member. Everybody I was related to growing up pretty much was a public school educator. And I was 17 years old when former Governor Scott Walker took office and introduced Act 10 and slashed public school funding, took away teachers' collective bargaining rights, essentially, and maybe even more importantly, just kind of unleashed, again, a political rhetoric movement that painted educators as villains and kind of scapegoated them. So those were two of the things that happened as I was an adolescent becoming an adult in Wisconsin that really showed me that powerful things come out of the Capitol, and that if we don't do the right thing, they can really cause lasting harm. So I then, after graduating from college, I worked as a special ed paraprofessional in public schools, really saw the funding woes and the difficulty of administering the most important public services when we don't have enough resources allocated to do that. Started advocating, got a degree in journalism, wrote a lot about these kinds of issues, ended up advocating for public education professionally at a nonpartisan organization called Wisconsin Public Education Network, where I was the communications director for almost 5 years. And then when the district boundaries changed for the legislature, and I had been so frustrated by how our movement building so frequently kind of hit a roadblock when we would hit the state capitol and we didn't have enough allies in office at the state level. And I saw that we had an opportunity in Eau Claire, where I'm from, to elect somebody new and have it be, I think, not just a Democrat to kind of break the Republican stronghold, but the right kind of candidate who is bold and rooted in like grassroots community organizing and young. I have UW Eau Claire in my district. I really did not want us to regret what we did with that opportunity. So I tried to talk myself out of running for several weeks and annoyed my friends with all my phone calls, but eventually I couldn't talk myself out of it, and here we are.
Yeah. And tell me about that experience, about talking to people in your district as someone running for office, but then what it's been like as someone in office and how you've built relationships there.
Yeah, I mean, I had a lot of relationships going into deciding to run for office. I mean, from education and journalism and community organizing, those are very people-based practices that I had been part of for a long time. But you think you know everybody and you really don't. Running for office is by far the thing that pushes you out of your comfort zone faster than anything else I've ever done. I've started to become one of those people that thinks everybody should do it once, no matter for some office, no matter how small, because you really meet so many people so quickly. And what you're inviting them to do is share their passion and what motivates them. And that's a really fast and rewarding way to get to know people. The conversations that I was having was basically giving people permission to believe in democracy and public systems in Wisconsin again. 14 years of gerrymandering and essentially one party stronghold rule that was siphoning off resources from the public systems that people deserve, and then essentially not giving, for example, progressive rural Wisconsin residents a voice because they were gerrymandered into such deep red districts, and even giving voters who wanted to vote for Democrats or progressive candidates in cities like Eau Claire not much of a voice because they weren't going to have a critical mass in the Capitol. I was out there explaining that with the new districts, we had an opportunity to be heard, but that could only happen if we elected somebody who had a strategy to govern in partnership with the community. And it was really rewarding to kind of watch people relax into that possibility and think, okay, maybe it's time to start voting again, or building a relationship with candidates and legislators because we might actually be able to work together in the new session. As a legislator, I think with all those of us who are new, 23 of us as Assembly Democrats alone, we actually have an incredible opportunity to tell truths about what happens inside the Capitol that people might not have heard yet. So I've been doing a lot of educational communications face to face with folks in my district this session to explain that there actually is not a lack of good ideas in the Capitol. The reason that these good ideas haven't become law is because there's a lot of power in the majority. And while the margins are a lot narrower right now, the other party controls the agenda in especially the Assembly, where something like, for example, the postpartum Medicaid bill can happen, which has over 70 co-sponsors in the Assembly. Every single Democrat, a lot of Republicans, it would pass easily. But because we don't set the agenda and Speaker Robin Vos does, it hasn't been brought for a vote because he doesn't like it. And so I'm out there explaining, I'm frustrated by the same things as my constituents are in the ways that we aren't being heard in the Capitol, and I can explain to you why. And that's been a significant part of my sort of relationship building and communication so far as a legislator.
Yeah, on that, tell me about some specific issues that maybe you've either heard from your constituents or you're trying to push in the Capitol. Maybe it's a combination of both.
Yeah, I'd say it is a combination of both. I mean, as you can tell from my background, public education is my own personal sort of and professional background. It's my area of expertise. I believe it is foundational to everything else that we want and need and deserve. There is no just society we can build without a robust and equitable public education system. So that's what I usually tell people. I believe that people want an authentic legislator and representative who is honest about where their priorities lie. And so when I speak to people, either at their home or at an event or even through the media, I say, I want to end the 16 consecutive years of underfunding relative to inflation. I want to stop you from having to pay through your public school district, through your tax dollars for private schools that you don't have any oversight over. I want to fix the school funding formula so it's not tied to your property taxes. And I want the metric that we use to fund something like public schools to be kids' needs and not any of these other arbitrary measures that we're using right now, this austerity mindset. And that resonates. Not everybody in the world considers education their number one priority or number one issue, of course. But I think it opens up a conversation about worldviews. I have found in the Capitol that there are kind of two schools of thought when we look at something like the state budget, the process that we're in right now. You can look at the pie of resources that we have as a state as an opportunity to meet our responsibility to the people in our districts, to fund every single service that they deserve, and to do it in a responsible way. Or you can look at it as an opportunity to get your hands on that money. And when I look at movements to privatize public systems or to hold back on funding things like healthcare, housing, food, and education, which I firmly believe are human rights, I believe that is just a fundamentally wrong way to look at public services. So I think my education background opens up a really meaningful conversation with both the urban and rural parts of my district, folks that live in my community, and sort of informs the way that I look through every policy and budgeting decision that we're making in the Capitol. Obviously, I'm on the education committee. It's the expertise that I bring. I'm really pushing a public education agenda, but no issue is more important than the others ultimately, and it definitely informs my my legislative worldview, I guess.
Sure. And on that, budget discussions are pretty high profile in the state capitol right now. And education, I know, has been a big topic in the previous negotiations between Governor Tony Evers and the Republican leaders. And they talked a lot about reimbursing special education. And it seems like Republicans and the governor are on very different pages about that. And I've also heard you bring forth some proposals that are maybe even different than those, what they were saying. Tell me about what you would propose and what you make of what Governor Evers is thinking, as well as Republican leaders.
Yeah, well, there's a lot to that question. The main reaction that I have is that Republicans walking away from the negotiating table because they didn't want to meet the funding demands that the governor was putting forward for public education is a betrayal of democracy. I was at those Joint Finance Committee hearings. I went to the one in Wausau in person. I tracked what people were saying. The number one most common priority that people shared with that committee was that they supported every single dollar allocated by the governor in his budget for public education as a minimum. And so for them to say that's too much and we're walking away from the negotiations means that they're negotiating on kids' backs. And it means that they do not wish to honor what constituents across Wisconsin told them. So it is incredibly irresponsible for them to halt those negotiations over this issue. Kids should not be a negotiating wedge. The public education community has grown very weary of having to go to referendums just to keep lights on in public schools. We think the state has a responsibility to fund those schools, and it shouldn't be on local communities to dip into their pockets and pay taxes twice. Basically, eventually people aren't going to be able to do that, and it's very unfair and disequalizing. And so we've been watching what the biggest cause for those referendums is. And it is the low reimbursement rate for special education before anything else. So public education people were calling for at least a 90% reimbursement of special ed. It's at 30% right now. And voucher programs that participate in special needs scholarships do get 90% or more from the state. So it's not fair. And so we were all calling for 90%. The Department of Public Instruction and Dr. Underly asked for 90%. And then the governor put forward a 60% proposal. So 60%, I believe, should be the floor, not the ceiling. We shouldn't go anywhere under 60% for special ed. And I've been upfront that a budget bill that reaches the assembly that does not include 60% special ed will not get my support under any circumstances whatsoever. And the other major cause of all these referendums and instability in public education is that school districts, the first thing they have to do when they get resources from the state is take some off the top and give it to the statewide voucher program, dollars that go straight to private schools. And when they do that, taxpayers lose all of their oversight over those dollars. They don't have to follow the same set of rules. They don't even have to follow the same non-discrimination laws. The schools can pick and choose which students they want, even though they're getting public dollars. And now the pot for public schools, which is a constitutional requirement in Wisconsin, is smaller. So I introduced Assembly Bill 307, trying to get it passed before the budget because we have enrollment caps coming off that voucher program next year in statute right now. And I think we need to keep those caps on so we can continue debating the voucher program and not let this financial balloon pop while we're in our next budget, not knowing how much it might possibly cost taxpayers in Wisconsin to fund basically a free-for-all of vouchers. I'm very disappointed that so far the budget maneuvers that the Republicans have shown are ignoring these two biggest issues facing public school districts and causing referendums, special ed reimbursement and the voucher program. They seem interested in increasing public dollars on private schools, not increasing accountability or transparency, and essentially continuing to vilify a public education system that Wisconsinites deserve and support. So if we don't get a budget that actually fixes these funding problems and invests in public school districts, I will be working with my colleagues in every way that I can think of to get to oppose that budget, because we just can't do this anymore. It's time for people to start thinking about what their community looks like without a public school, because that's how bad it's going to get. We can't afford another budget full of these shenanigans.
Sure. And thank you for your insight. I have one last question for you, Christian, about what kind of your plans are going forward in the legislature. Anything education related or not that you're wanting to focus on in the coming months, maybe after the budget or during the budget process?
Yeah, in general, it is trying to normalize being the type of legislator that um, I I wanted to see when I was an advocate on the outside. That's the practice that I'm trying to normalize, and I think maybe after the budget there'll be even more time to put that into action. So, for example, looking at every legislative proposal that we get first through the lens of, does this proposal treat healthcare, housing, food, and education as human rights? Yes or no? Not looking at it through, does this proposal help me get reelected? And if those two things are not in concert, if it moves us closer to treating those four things as human rights, but it's difficult to get reelected, I will fill that gap through communicating with my constituents. I won't fill it through compromising on my values. And so I will be pushing for literally reworking the public school funding formula so it isn't tied to property value, and it isn't at the whims of the legislature. I believe we should just tax the ultra wealthy instead of giving them tax breaks, tax major corporations, and have enough public revenue in the state to fund the next generation and fund healthcare, housing, food, and education as human rights. So I think the math lines up. I just want to continue, to the best of my ability, being the kind of legislator that advocates in the Chippewa Valley and in my community have always wanted to see. And I think that if we do that, we also will grow our power and we'll be able to actually enact our agenda sooner rather than later.
Thank you, Christian. That's all the questions I have for you today. I appreciate you joining me here on the podcast today.
I appreciate you inviting me. Good to see you.
All right, everyone, thank you for tuning in to this week's Capital Chats podcast. If you want to learn more about freshman representatives in the legislature, you can head to our website at wispolitics.com. But for now, I'm Kate Morton.
And I'm Abigail Evans.
Thanks for tuning into Capital Chats, brought to you by Spectrum.